As a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been an involuntary shift to online learning in its many manifestations. In turn, this has highlighted and facilitated a range of alternative modes of delivery for international students. There are sometimes referred to as flexible modes of delivery and at other times as alternative modes of delivery. The traditional face-to-face mode has been overtaken, certainly for a period of time, by a range of alternative arrangements that cater for lockdowns and community restrictions. Now, arguably, the most challenging part of these restrictions has been the unpredictability, making planning and strategy difficult. The option of having alternative to face-to-face delivery ready and available is a most valued commodity at present. Now, prior to the pandemic, international education, certainly onshore in Australia, was in face-to-face mode, with strict regulations around the percentage of classes allowed to be completed online by international students, attendance at face-to-face classes, the extent of employment hours permitted on a student visa, and progression rates needed to maintain a student visa. Now, much of this was dictated by the Australian ESOS Act of 2000 and the supporting national code. Then, of course, everything changed. So, in truth, there's been a slow and determined movement in the regulations over a period of time. So matters such as attendance have been downplayed for a number of years. For example, working hours have been redefined and quite significantly in recent times, and even matters of progression have been either suspended or made more flexible to provide the support and compassion required with dealing with students who are under duress. The so-called alternative flexible modes of delivery, blended learning as described by West, online learning as outlined by Chanda, and hybrid learning as illuminated by Whateley, and mobile learning were viewed previously as essentially domestic options with little, if any, application for international students in Australia, certainly those onshore. Now, international students were provided with some of these options at the more progressive institutions, but usually under conditions and other restrictions. This too is no longer the case. The rapid shift to online learning in 2020 created a precedent. Some say a lightning rod that is likely to stay with us for some time. The prediction is that even with a return to face-to-face learning in the years ahead, the percentage of study permitted online for international students will grow to 50% of the load. This represents a significant shift in thinking and would be consistent with developments in other countries around the world. Now, tertiary institutions were required to move fairly rapidly into e-learning. It was a matter of survival for many during the pandemic. Now, some of the better prepared organisations, and many had been dabbling in alternative flexible options for some time, managed to deviate even further and utilise the other modes with varying degrees of success. Now, sector reports suggest that more flexibly inclined have fared better during the so-called international student crisis. There are several reasons for this. When the Australian government regulations softened on a number of paid hours that international students can work in the country, for example, from 40 hours per fortnight to unlimited, the demand, of course, for flexibility increased significantly. And this will be a very different situation to reverse in coming years. It's highly likely that flexibility will remain a constant feature as we move forward. The sudden switch to online caused a considerable amount of distress for many institutions, and in particular academic staff. For many staff, this was the end of the world as they knew it. Now, understandably, for those who had been teaching international students for many years in the traditional face-to-face mode, this was, of course, a precarious and uninvited demand. They were, in fact, digital convicts. For others, it was the opportunity to put in place a variety of modes that could still maintain the high levels of student engagement. Now, learner engagement, coupled with the student experience, remember, is perceived, certainly in Australia, as the end game. Now, my opinion has fared well, with the most recent student feedback of units scoring 4.4 out of a possible 5, the highest score since record keeping commenced in T1 in 2016. This is my own institution. Now, staff satisfaction scored 4.3 out of 5, and 92% of students stated that they would prefer to stay online for the duration of their studies. Now, sector feedback suggests that the aggregate is probably lower than this. Now, given the commitment made to technology upgrades and capital investment in lecture studios, these indicators for us are very satisfying and to some degree a relief. Now, classrooms were quickly converted to lecture studios, and roaming cameras, monitors, and upgraded learning management systems and a live studio look and feel were put in place at considerable cost. Now, staff training also became a priority. The notion of simply throwing staff online and from remote locations was not seen as either appropriate or viable. The key issue for us was a focus on learner engagement, and this could be best achieved with high quality delivery from a familiar environment. This again came at a cost, but the dividend has been well worth it. The approach is by no means the standard approach. Many institutions were thrown into chaos from the outset, and they've struggled with home delivery and have reaped significant disapproval from students throughout the country. The notion of recycling low-end presentations has also met with considerable criticism and disappointment across the sector. The return to campus movement has taken quite a few hits with flash lockdowns across the country. Some of the enforced lockdowns, Victoria, my own state, had 6, have varied in length from 10 days to 4 months. The key issue has been the unpredictability of closures and durations, especially in some states with hair-trigger border closures accompanied by circuit breaker lockdowns, both with very short fuses and very little time to prepare. Now, in this context, face-to-face options seem dim, in truth, doomed for the short term, at least. Now, the very notion of opening up to face-to-face operations and then having to do an about turn several weeks later in response to restrictions makes the task at best stressful and at worst unmanageable. So the process all creates unnecessary uncertainty for students. This is less an issue with business students than it is for, say, applied science students. Several providers have recently formally announced that they will continue online learning for the rest of 2021 and 2022, some even predicting throughout 2023. The news has not been well received in many quarters. What the decision has done, though, is provide a degree of certainty and consistency, which is not a bad development in itself. It would appear that online learning and its associated variations are here for some time. Now, some predict that they'll endure well into 23 and possibly even 2024. Hybrid learning appears to be the future, or certainly the mode for the next couple of years. The model is based on delivering live sessions online with the option for students to attend face-to-face by choice. It's not unlike the concept of live-to-air television, drawing from the analogy of the hybrid car, where the decision is made by the driver on the mode, and this can be changed as required along the journey. Now, the enormous advantage of H-learning or hybrid learning mode is the quick and relatively easy response mechanism to future lockdowns and restrictions should they occur. Now, the acceptance of the notion of high-end hygiene and COVID safety are also very well accommodated in this mode. Now, the worst case scenario is the option of sitting in a classroom during a live delivery that's suspended for a given period of time, but teaching and learning continue online without interruption. So it's important to remember that my own institution has gauged through student survey that currently only 6 to 8% of students are even interested in physically returning to campus, even in the hybrid mode. The mode also provides students with the all-important option of on-campus, off-campus delivery. Now, this is well received by students, certainly in Australia. For staff, it requires delivery on site throughout the trimester and semester. This is less well received by staff, but for many, it's regarded as a necessary evil. The issue of staff teaching on site is all about ensuring a quality output complete with the necessary technology standard and IT support. Now, this standard and consistency of delivery are difficult, if not impossible, to replicate in the home studio environment. The impact on multiple site/campus delivery is not up for debate. In the face-to-face environment, international students at multiple locations would receive dedicated campus-bound delivery. Now, this has changed significantly, with a more centralised online delivery plus additional campus support required face-to-face as needed. Now, this provides an extra swing on the notion of hybrid learning. At the heart of COVID-19 scenario is the impact that changes have had on the international student experience. There is a mixed response to online learning, and this is not surprising. At the same time, there has been considerable acceptance of the mode, not only in Australia, but internationally. Now, this has been accompanied by an acknowledgement of the validity and currency of online learning, along with its variations. There has been a considerable focus on student and staff response to online learning and teaching, and the outcomes vary from institution to institution. Mechanisms such as student feedback on unit surveys, staff satisfaction surveys, student satisfaction with online learning surveys, national quilt surveys relating to overall student experience, industry group surveys, and a plethora of research surveys are all useful tools for gathering intelligence on and around student staff satisfaction. The essential issue is gathering the data, and most importantly, using the findings to improve delivery. Keeping abreast of state and national trends is important. The best source of meaningful feedback, though, is internal survey. It is essential that all providers have a clear understanding of their own student staff needs and respond quickly and appropriately to those needs expressed. Acting on national feedback can be useful, but nothing beats listening carefully to your own cohorts and acting quickly and decisively. If supported appropriately, the outcomes and levels of satisfaction can be highly credible and satisfying for all stakeholders. So using the ongoing data collected provides a genuine opportunity to enhance both the student experience and the learner engagement. My school is an independent business school. It appears that on-site activities are currently not a high priority for students. Lecturer engagement and e-resourcing, on the other hand, have become vital elements in the learning and teaching effort. Now, this may not be the case with other institutions, but the important fact is that it is the key to this institution's success. Online learning will be with us for some time, well into 2023 and probably beyond. With the likely opening of international borders in mid-2022, there will be a significant return of international student numbers to Australia. Some say a tsunami-like event. Others are more conservative, but most agree that there will be a return in solid numbers. Now, the prediction, though, is not a return to the way things were, but rather to a more mixed mode approach to learning and teaching. And this mix will likely include up to 50% online and alternative options, changing the international landscape for the better. Now, this may impact significantly on the notion of completing the full degree onshore. Students may in fact opt for the online option offshore, for example, with only partial completion onshore. Now, this will require a serious rethink in terms of visa regulations, but may in fact be a viable approach. A number of institutions, forced by the pandemic conditions, have significant numbers of students currently studying offshore online. To some degree, this has changed the thinking around the issue.